We're going to move this on now to the natural history through data integration. So in this pyramid, you can imagine there's lots of integration going back and forth, and I hope you get the sense on how the different layers slowly work with each other. Jules.
Thank you. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you guys today. So I'm going to be bridging off of Riley's work, so think computational frameworks, and now looking at how can we start to leverage real-world data to better understand the natural history of SYNGAP1 related disorders. So I'll keep my talk relatively brief, but I want to give everyone an idea of how can we start to use data-driven approaches to identify clinical signatures in SYNGAP1. How can we start to reconstruct epilepsy histories in more granularity and delineate the real-world treatment landscape over time? And then how can we start to build a framework where we're integrating developmental outcomes alongside seizure endpoints? So I'll actually start with the challenge or question of how can we more comprehensively analyze a complex neurodevelopmental disorder like SYNGAP1. And the idea here is that we have different approaches to phenotyping. So what I mean by that is that there are trade-offs between data granularity and cohort size. So typically, larger studies may include more individuals, but may be limited in terms of data granularity. On the flip side, we have smaller cohort studies that are more focused and can include data of more precision and specificity. So the idea, we have a range of different kinds of studies that we can include, and the idea is how can we build a framework where we can integrate data as well as approaches from across the spectrum. So how do we do this in SYNGAP1? So we're looking at 3 different databases using real-world data. We included 246 individuals from the AMBIT database, which is a healthcare insurance claims database, Citizen, which is reconstructed medical records, as we've learned, as well as internal CHOP data. So we're reconstructing clinical histories based on electronic medical records of individuals that have been seen at our center. And the idea here, or the takeaway here, is that we already have an immensity of data that we can retrospectively put together and analyze to reconstruct some of the disease aspects of SYNGAP1. So starting with the broad scope, looking at healthcare claims data. Here we're going to be comparing clinical features that are enriched in individuals with SYNGAP1 compared to other epilepsies and neurodevelopmental disorders. So on the x-axis, we're going to have the frequency of the clinical feature and individuals with any epilepsy identified in claims data using the G40 plus diagnosis code. This is going to be compared to the y-axis, where we identified 246 individuals with SYNGAP1, also based on the ICD-10 code. And so what did we find? Unsurprisingly, we see clinical features such as behavioral abnormality, neurodevelopmental delay, autism, intellectual disability standing out or being more enriched in individuals with SYNGAP. In contrast, we also know that only like 70 to 80% of individuals with SYNGAP will have seizures relative to the other comparator group in which every individual will have seizures. We can also look at other comparator groups. So here looking at almost 4,000 individuals with Angelman syndrome and more than 5,000 individuals with Rett syndrome. And what we see here is that clinical features such as autism, behavior abnormalities will stand out or remain enriched in individuals with SYNGAP1. Now, what about the dimension of time, and how do these clinical features look across the age span? We can take individual clinical features, looking here at seizures, and map the frequency of the clinical feature across the age span. So here, we're looking at the frequency of seizures in individuals with SYNGAP1 relative to a broader cohort of individuals with epilepsy, Rett syndrome, and Angelman. We can also look at other clinical features, such as generalized onset seizures, neurodevelopmental delay, autistic behavior, behavior abnormality, and language impairment. And what we're starting to see is that by around the age of 2, the clinical features that are more prominent in SYNGAP1 are starting to emerge relative to these other comparator groups. But can we be more granular? So here, we're looking at citizen data as well as our internal CHOP data. Can we reconstruct epilepsy histories with more precision? So on the top here, we're looking at cumulative seizure onset, as well as a breakdown of seizure types. And on the bottom, we're looking at the interplay between seizures, looking at specific seizure types as well as seizure frequencies. And what the bars are indicating are the proportion of individuals with seizures at a certain frequency for SYNGAP1 relative to STXBP1, SCN2A, and 8A. So we're reconstructing seizure histories on a monthly basis, assigning monthly seizure frequencies based on reconstructed medical records. And what you're already starting to realize is the difference between SYNGAP1 relative to these other genetic epilepsies. What about the treatment landscape? So we can also look at medication data that are extracted from the medical records. And this provides an unbiased and systematic view of the treatment landscape in SYNGAP1. So on the top, we're looking at medications for seizures. We can see levetiracetam, as well as Depakote, and then lamotrigine are commonly prescribed. On the bottom, we're looking at medications for behavioral indications, where we see medications for sleep-related concerns in early infancy and childhood, and then more medications for behavior later on in life. So lastly, I'll just briefly talk about developmental outcomes. You guys seen this before, but we can also look at the acquisition of milestones as a way to measure development. This is based on citizen data as well as CHOP data. We can look at a cross-sectional report of what is the frequency of these milestones that are being achieved in SYNGAP, and then on the right, cumulative onset of, or cumulative accumulation of seizures. So of individuals who, of milestones, of individuals who are able to achieve these milestones, at what age did they achieve the milestones? And this is a way to quantify and put numbers to development. So just to briefly summarize, we're looking at ways to integrate real-world data from existing healthcare resources, from medical records to claims data. Data harmonization and these computational approaches have allowed us to identify some of these clinical features that are enriched in individual SYNGAP, reconstruct epilepsy histories as well as the treatment landscape. And then I'll lastly point out that developmental outcomes are going to be critical endpoints in SYNGAP1. And I'll be handing it off to Jill McKee and Sam Pierce, who will talk more about standardized outcome measures and a prospective natural history study for SYNGAP1. I'd like to thank our team here as well as everyone in this room. Thank you.